At the picnic my mom said, "Next time don't bring the kid." No one defended my son. Until my oldest daughter pushed her chair back and said, "Say that again." The whole table went quiet. And then my mother told me not to bring my son to a family picnic. Her own grandson, 6 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, obsessed with dinosaurs, and she looked me dead in the eye across the potato salad and said, "Next time don't bring the kid." Like he was a stray dog that wandered in from the neighbor's yard. And nobody, not my dad, not my uncle, not my aunt, said a single word. 23 adults at that table, and the silence was so thick you could choke on it. But then my 13-year-old daughter Marlo pushed her chair back. And what came out of that girl's mouth? I promise you I did not teach her that. But I wish I had. My name is Corinne. I'm 34. I live in Dayton, Ohio with my 2 kids. Marlo, who's 13 going on 45, and my little guy, Theo, who just turned 6. I work as a dental hygienist 3 days a week, and I pick up admin shifts at a walk-in clinic on weekends. I'm not rich. I'm not broke. I'm that in-between where you can pay the electric bill on time but a flat tire still ruins your whole month. You know exactly what I mean, don't you? Now here's what you need to understand about my family before any of this makes sense. My mom, Patrice, has always been a woman who needed to be the center of everything. Not in the loud, dramatic, throw a plate at the wall kind of way. No. She's quieter than that. She's the type who will smile at you while saying something that makes your chest cave in. She'll compliment your dress and then add, "It's brave of you to wear that." She'll tell you she's proud of you and then spend 40 minutes talking about how much better your cousin is doing. My dad, Gil, is the kind of man who learned a long time ago that agreeing with Patrice is easier than disagreeing. I don't even blame him anymore. That man has been nodding along for 37 years of marriage. I think he forgot he's allowed to have his own opinions. But that's a whole separate conversation. For years, and I mean years, I was the one who held this family together with money. Not a lot, but enough. When my parents' furnace broke 2 winters ago, who sent the $1,200? Me. When my dad needed new tires on his truck and they were behind on their insurance. Me again. When my mom wanted to throw herself a birthday dinner at a steakhouse and then conveniently forgot her wallet? 3 guesses. I never complained. Not once. Because that's what you do for family, right? That's what I told myself anyway. You help because they're your people, and one day when you need them they'll show up for you. Except they never did. The one time, I asked my mother to watch Theo for a weekend so I could take Marlo to a volleyball tournament in Columbus. My mom said she was too tired. Theo is not a difficult kid. He watches cartoons, he eats whatever you put in front of him, and he goes to bed at 8:30 without a fight. But she was too tired. And then I saw on Facebook that same weekend she hosted a canasta night with 6 of her friends and made 3 kinds of dip. 3 kinds of dip, but too tired for her grandson. That stung. But I swallowed it. I always swallowed it. Now I want to tell you about my cousin Deanna. She's actually my mom's sister's daughter, and she lives about 40 minutes from us in Springfield. Deanna and I have been close since we were little. She's the only person in this family who ever looked at me and said, "Corinne, you don't have to keep doing this." He saw it. She saw how my mother treated me like an ATM with a heartbeat, and she hated it. Deanna was my rock. Every time I'd call her crying after some comment my mom made, Deanna would say, "Write it down. One day you'll need to remember why you stopped." I should have listened sooner. So the picnic. Let me set the scene for you. It was the 4th of July weekend, and my Aunt Rochelle, that's Deanna's mom, organized this big family cookout at Eastwood Metro Park. The whole family was there. Uncles, aunts, second cousins I haven't seen since somebody's wedding in 2019. Kids everywhere. Burgers on the grill. Somebody brought a speaker playing old Motown. It was actually nice for about 2 hours. Theo was being an absolute angel. He was playing tag with Deanna's boys, he shared his juice box with a little girl he didn't even know. And when he scraped his knee on the sidewalk, he didn't even cry. He just walked up to me, showed me his knee and said, "Mama, I think I need a dinosaur band-aid." Tell me that's not the cutest thing you've ever heard. But my mom? She had been watching him all afternoon with this look on her face. You know the look, like she just bit into something sour. Every time Theo ran past her chair, she'd sigh. When he accidentally bumped the table and a cup of lemonade tipped over, not even onto anyone, just onto the grass, she said loud enough for half the table to hear, "This is exactly why." This is exactly why what, Mom? I let it go. I cleaned up the lemonade. I told Theo to be careful. And I sat back down. Then dinner happened. We're all eating and Theo is sitting next to Marlo. He's being fine. He's got ketchup on his chin and he's swinging his legs under the table because the bench is too tall for him, but he's 6. That's what 6-year-olds do. And out of nowhere, my mother puts her fork down, looks at me from across the table and says, with a smile, always with a smile, "Corinne, next time maybe just don't bring the kid. It would be easier for everyone." The table went quiet. I mean silent. Like someone had pressed mute on the whole park. My Aunt Rochelle looked down at her plate. My Uncle Vernon suddenly became very interested in his corn on the cob. My dad took a sip of his beer and looked at the sky like he was searching for airplanes. And Theo heard it. He's 6, not deaf. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, ketchup still on his chin, and whispered, "Mama, does Grandma not want me here? Do you understand what that does to a mother? Can you even imagine?" I opened my mouth. I was going to say something. I don't even know what. Probably something polite, something measured, something that would keep the peace. Because that's what I always did. Keep the peace. Swallow it. Smile. Send the check. But before I could say a single word, Marlo put her burger down. My 13-year-old daughter, who had been sitting there quietly eating her food and minding her own business, put her burger down, wiped her hands on her napkin, pushed her chair back from the table and stood up. She looked directly at my mother. And she said, "Say that again." Not yelling. Not screaming. Just calm. Steady. 13 years old, standing there in her volleyball t-shirt and her ponytail, and she said it like she was daring my mother to repeat herself. The whole table just froze. My Aunt Rochelle's hand was halfway to her mouth and it just stopped. My mom looked at Marlo like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. And honestly, neither could I. My mom did this little laugh, you know, the one, the dismissive one, and said, "Marlo, sit down, this is an adult conversation." And Marlo said, "Then stop acting like a child." I think my Uncle Vernon actually choked on his corn. But here's where it gets complicated. Because my mom didn't just take that and move on. Oh no. Patrice doesn't lose arguments, especially not to a 13-year-old. She looked at me, not at Marlo, at me, and said, "This is what happens when you don't teach your children respect." And I felt that old familiar pull. That weight in my chest that told me to apologize. To smooth it over. To grab Marlo's arm and say, "Honey, sit down." To protect the peace at the cost of myself. But something was different this time. Maybe it was watching Theo's face. Maybe it was hearing my own daughter do what I'd been too afraid to do for 34 years. Maybe I was just finally tired. I looked at my mother and I said, "Patrice, Theo is your grandson. And if you can't treat him like family, then I don't see why I should keep treating you like mine." And then I packed up both my kids, my potato salad and my dignity, and I walked to the car. But trust me, that was just the beginning. Because what happened in the weeks after that picnic? That's when things really got ugly. And the decision I made next. Some people in my family still haven't forgiven me for it. But here's the thing, I'd do it again tomorrow. I'm going to tell you exactly what I did. And I need you to be honest with me about whether you think I went too far. So after that picnic, I drove home with my kids in the back seat and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Marlo was quiet the whole ride, just staring out the window. Theo fell asleep with his mouth open and his dinosaur toy still in his hand. And me. I was replaying my mother's voice in my head on a loop. "Next time, don't bring the kid." Over and over. Like a song you hate but can't stop humming. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes after I parked. Just sat there. The engine off, the windows down, listening to the crickets. And I thought, how many times have I driven home from a family event feeling exactly like this? How many times have I pulled into this driveway with that same knot in my stomach? And the answer scared me. Because it was every time. Every single time. That night, after I got the kids to bed, I called Deanna. She picked up on the first ring, which tells you everything you need to know about Deanna. I told her what happened. Every word, every look, every second of silence from every person at that table. And when I was done, Deanna said something that I will never forget. She said, "Corinne, you've been writing checks for people who wouldn't give you a glass of water if you were on fire. When are you going to stop?" And I sat there in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, still smelling like sunscreen and charcoal from the cookout, and I said, "Tonight. I'm stopping tonight." Now let me tell you what stopping actually looked like. Because it wasn't some big dramatic announcement. I didn't post on Facebook. I didn't send a group text. I just stopped. Quietly. Completely. The first test came 9 days later. My mom called me, not to apologize, obviously, that would require her to believe she did something wrong. She called to tell me that the water heater at their house was making a noise, and my dad thought it might need replacing. And then she did the thing she always does. She didn't ask me for money directly. No, Patrice is way too smart for that. She just said, "I don't know what we're going to do, Corinne. Your father's only working part-time now and my knees have been so bad I can barely make it to the store. I just don't know." And then silence. That heavy, loaded silence that was supposed to make me say, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of it." You know what I said instead? I said, "That sounds really stressful. I hope you figure it out." The pause on the other end of that phone was so long I actually checked to see if the call dropped. It hadn't. She just didn't know what to do with a version of me that didn't reach for her wallet. She tried again 2 days later. This time it was about the electric bill being higher than expected because of the air conditioning. Same script, the sigh, the I just don't know, the long pause. And I gave her the same answer. That's tough, Mom. Maybe you could call the electric company about a payment plan. I could almost hear her brain short-circuiting through the phone. Honestly, part of me felt terrible. I'm not going to lie to you. There's a part of me that wanted to just send the money and make it easy. Because that's the thing about being the family fixer. It becomes your identity. You don't even know who you are without the fixing. Does that make sense to anyone, or is it just me? But Deanna kept me strong. She texted me every morning, literally every morning, a little message that said something like, Day 12 of choosing yourself. Keep going. Or, you are not an ATM. You are not an ATM. You are not an ATM. That woman deserves a medal and a vacation. Now here's where the backlash started. Because when the money stopped flowing, the phone calls started coming. But not from my mom. Oh no. Patrice doesn't fight her own battles when she can recruit an army. First it was my Aunt Gail. That's my mom's youngest sister. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work and left a voicemail that said, and I'm paraphrasing here because the actual message was about 4 minutes long. Basically that I was being selfish, that my parents were struggling, that family helps family, and that she didn't raise me, but if she had, I would know better. She didn't raise me. He's right about that. She also didn't help raise me, didn't pay for anything, didn't babysit once, and wasn't at a single one of my school events. But sure, Gail, tell me about family. Then it was my mom's friend Barbara. A woman I have spoken to maybe 6 times in my entire life called me to say she'd heard I was abandoning my parents and that she thought I should really think about what kind of example I was setting for my children. Barbara, who I once saw steal a centerpiece from a church potluck. He's giving me parenting advice now. Do you think I should have caved? Honestly, because some days I almost did. But then something happened that made me realize I was on the right track. Theo came home from school one day. This was about 3 weeks after the picnic. And he sat down at the kitchen table while I was making dinner. He was doing that thing kids do where they're clearly working up to saying something but they keep opening and closing their mouth like a little fish. Finally he said, Mama, am I bad? I put the spatula down. I turned off the stove. I sat down next to him and said, Why would you ask me that? And he said, Because Grandma doesn't like me. So maybe I'm bad. My 6-year-old was sitting there, genuinely trying to figure out what he did wrong. This kid who shares his snacks with every child at school. This kid who draws me pictures of our family with everyone smiling. This kid who said, excuse me, to a mannequin at Target last week because he bumped into it. And he thought he was the problem. I held him so tight. And I told him, baby, you are not bad. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And sometimes grown-ups have problems that have nothing to do with you. He seemed okay after that. He went back to playing with his dinosaurs. But I went into my bathroom, closed the door and cried so hard I had to sit on the floor. That's when I made the second decision. The first one was cutting off the money. The second one was bigger. I decided I wasn't going to any more family events until my mother apologized. Not to me, to Theo. She needed to look that little boy in the eye and tell him she was sorry and that she loved him. That was my condition. Non-negotiable. And I told her exactly that. I called her up and I said, Mom, I love you. But until you apologize to Theo for what you said at the picnic, I'm not coming to Sunday dinners, I'm not coming to holidays, and I'm not sending another dime. You want to know what she said? She said, You're going to punish me over a joke? Corinne, I was joking. You've always been too sensitive. A joke. He called it a joke. My son questioning whether he's a bad person. That's the punchline, apparently. I said, then it should be easy to apologize for a joke. She hung up on me. And that's when the real war started. Because Patrice told everyone, and I mean everyone, her version of the story. In her version, I was the villain. I was the ungrateful daughter who cut off her struggling parents over a little comment at a barbecue. She left out the part about Theo. She left out the years of money. She left out every single thing that mattered. My cousin Deanna tried to set the record straight with some of the family, but you know how it goes. People believe the first version they hear. My Aunt Gail called me again. My Uncle Vernon sent me a text that just said, family first, Corinne. Easy for him to say, he's never sent my parents a penny. Even my dad called me. And that one hurt the most. Because Gil isn't a bad man. He's just a weak one. And he said, Corinne, sweetheart, can't you just let this go? Your mother didn't mean anything by it. She's been upset for weeks. She's been upset. She's been upset. My son thinks he's defective and my mother is the one who's upset. I said, Dad, I love you. But you sat there. You heard what she said, you saw Theo's face and you took a sip of your beer. So I need you to understand, I'm not mad at you, but I can't pretend that was okay. He got quiet. And then he said something that surprised me. He said, I know I should have said something. That was the most honest thing my father had said to me in years. And for 1 second I thought maybe he'd be the one to turn this around. Maybe he'd talk to my mom. Maybe he'd bridge the gap. But he didn't. Because Gil is Gil. And agreeing with Patrice is still easier than anything else. Meanwhile, Marlo was watching all of this. My kid is sharp, she hears the phone calls, she reads the room, she sees me close my eyes and breathe before I answer texts. And one evening she came into my room and sat on my bed and said, "Mom, I want you to know that what I did at the picnic? I'd do it again. Every time." I looked at this girl, my girl, with her messy bun and her algebra homework and her chipped nail polish, and I thought, when did she become braver than me? I said, "Marlo, you shouldn't have to fight battles for your brother." And she said, "I'm not fighting battles for him. I'm fighting battles with you. Tell me I don't have the most incredible kid on this planet. Just try to tell me that." But what happened next, and I promise you I did not see this coming, is the part that changed everything. Because someone in my family decided to get involved in a way I never expected. And the consequences? Let me just say that what my mother did after that made everything at the picnic look like a warm-up. I'm going to tell you exactly how she tried to turn my own children against me. And what I did when I found out. Well, let's just say Patrice finally met a version of Corinne she'd never seen before. So remember how I said someone in my family got involved in a way I didn't expect? About 5 weeks after the picnic, Marlo came home from school acting strange. Not upset, just off. She kept checking her phone and flipping it face down on the table. If you have a teenager, you know when that phone goes face down, something is happening. I gave her space. We had dinner. Theo told us a 10-minute story about a lizard on the playground that made absolutely no sense, and we clapped at the end anyway. Normal night. But later, after Theo was in bed, Marlo stood in my doorway with her arms crossed and said, "Mom, I need to show you something and I need you not to freak out." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a string of messages from my mother. Patrice had gotten Marlo's number, probably from Aunt Gail, who has the boundaries of a screen door in a hurricane, and had been texting my 13-year-old daughter for 3 days. The messages started sweet. "Hi sweetheart, Grandma misses you." But then they shifted. The way Patrice always operates. Slowly, carefully, like poison in sweet tea. "I wish your mom would let me see you and Theo. Your mom has always been very emotional. Even at your age she would overreact. Maybe you could talk to her for me?" She was recruiting my daughter. Telling a child that her mother was the problem. Asking my kid to do her dirty work. And the thing that made my blood boil, she never mentioned Theo. Not once. Didn't ask how he was. Didn't say she missed him. He didn't exist in those messages. But here's what I didn't know yet. Marlo hadn't just been reading silently. She'd been responding. To the message about me being emotional, Marlo wrote, "My mom's not emotional. She's just done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. There's a difference." To the one asking Marlo to talk to me, "I'm not going to ask my mom to forgive someone who hasn't apologized. That wouldn't make sense, would it?" I stared at that phone for a long time. Then I looked at Marlo, who was chewing her thumbnail like she was waiting to be grounded, and I said, "You are the most incredible human I have ever met." She said, "So I'm not in trouble?" I said, "Honey, the only person in trouble is your grandmother." Now here's where people in my family say I went too far. And I genuinely want to know if you agree. I screenshotted every message my mother sent Marlo. Every one. And I sent them to every person who had called me selfish. Aunt Gail. Uncle Vernon. Barbara with the stolen church centerpiece. No commentary. Just the screenshots and one line, "This is what she's doing now." Aunt Gail called and for the first time didn't start by defending my mother. She said, "I didn't know she was doing that." I said, "There's a lot you don't know, Gail, because you only ever listened to one side." Uncle Vernon. Radio silence. Which honestly was an improvement. Deanna called me laughing so hard she could barely breathe. She said, "Marlo is my hero. I'm buying that girl a pizza." And she did. Drove 40 minutes from Springfield with a large pepperoni and a stuffed triceratops for Theo because, in her words, "This kid deserves a present for no reason." That's the kind of family I want around my children. After I sent those screenshots, 2 weeks of complete silence from Patrice. She couldn't spin this one. Her own words, her own grandchild's phone, black and white. Then one Saturday morning, a knock at my door. My dad, Gil, standing on my porch in his old fishing hat holding a bakery bag. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He sat down at my kitchen table, put the bag down and said, "I brought those cinnamon rolls you liked when you were little." And then this man, who I have never once seen cry in my entire life, put his face in his hands and sobbed. He said, "I failed you, Corinne. I sat at that table and heard what your mother said, and I didn't speak because I've been afraid of that woman for 37 years. And I let it cost me my daughter and my grandkids." I said, "Dad, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest." And he was. For 2 hours he told me things he'd never said. That he always knew Mom was wrong. That every time I sent money he felt sick. That he'd brought it up with her once years ago and she didn't speak to him for 11 days so he never mentioned it again. Then he said something that surprised me. Your mother is scared, Corinne. She won't admit it but she's terrified she's losing you and she doesn't know how to fix it because everyone has always just bent. I said, I know. I bent for 34 years. I'm done. He nodded. Then he said, what if I stop bending too? 2 days later, Dad told me he'd had a real conversation with my mother. He told her the picnic was wrong. The texts were wrong. The years of depending on me were wrong. And he told her if she didn't fix this she'd lose him too. Then about 9 weeks after the picnic my phone rang. My mother. Quiet for a long time. Then she said, I need to talk to Theo. Because I owe that boy an apology. And I owe you one too. I let the silence sit. Then I said, I'll think about it. Some of you might think I should have jumped at that. But after everything, the money, the picnic, the text to Marlo, the smear campaign, I needed to protect my kids first. Deanna said, let her come. On your terms. In your house. And if she blows it, that's it. So I invited my mother for dinner the following Sunday. Just her, me, Marlo and Theo. I told her to come with a real apology or not come at all. She showed up at 5 in a dress, which she never wears for casual dinners. She brought yellow tulips. My favorite. I didn't think she remembered. Theo was on the couch watching cartoons. He looked up at her and didn't move. Didn't run to her like he used to. Just watched. Careful. And I saw it hit her right across the face, what she had done. She walked over. Knelt down, which with her knees was not easy, and said, Theo, Grandma needs to tell you something. What I said at the picnic was wrong and mean and you did nothing wrong. You are my grandson and I love you and I am so sorry. Theo looked at her for about 5 seconds. Then he said, it's okay, Grandma. Do you want to see my new dinosaur? 6 years old. No grudge. No conditions. Just grace. The kind adults forget exist. She hugged him and cried. Real tears, not performance tears. The kind where your shoulders shake and you can't talk. Over dinner she apologized to me too. Said she knew she'd been unfair for years. Said she was going to start seeing a counselor, which nearly knocked me off my chair because Patrice has always called therapy complaining to strangers. Then she looked at Marlo and said, I owe you an apology too. I should never have sent those messages. You were right to stand up for your brother. Marlo said, thank you, Grandma. But just so you know, I'll do it again if I have to. My mom actually laughed. A real one. And said, I believe you. Now I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. I still don't send money, that's done permanently. My dad got a full-time job at a hardware store and he talks about drill bits and lumber and honestly sounds happier than he has in a decade. Aunt Gail brought me a casserole and said, I shouldn't have gotten in the middle of that, without making eye contact. I'll take it. Uncle Vernon still hasn't said a word. But at Thanksgiving he sat next to Theo and asked him about every dinosaur by name. For Vernon that's practically a love letter. Deanna still comes over every other weekend with pizza and her boys. He's still my rock. Last week she texted me, Day 147 of choosing yourself. Look how far you came. I cried reading that. Good tears though. So that's my story. The picnic, the silence, the money, the texts, the screenshots, the cinnamon rolls, and the 13-year-old who stood up when nobody else would. If you enjoyed this story, I'd really appreciate a like. It means more than you know. And if something here reminded you of your own family, or if you think I handled something wrong, or you would have done it differently, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you're going through something like this right now, if you're the one who always gives and never gets, who keeps the peace at the cost of yourself, I want you to know, you're allowed to stop. You're allowed to say enough. And you might be surprised who's standing behind you when you finally do. For me, it was a girl in a volleyball t-shirt who looked my mother in the eye and said, say that again. Thank you so much for watching. From the bottom of my heart,